Hey, what's going on, guys? Today I got a really interesting topic. It is how to plan your lessons. So, if you are a person that is wasting a lot of time doing those types of things, then today is going to be great for you. Alright, so today we're going to talk about how to plan your lessons. And so I thought first off it would make sense to kind of describe why this is important. For me, I guess one of the things that I've ran into as long as I've preached is that there is a lot of time that is wasted wondering what you're going to preach on Sunday. And so I remember this especially when I was younger, and I've worked on it since then. But I would go and maybe get to the office or be thinking on Monday, hey, what do I need to preach? And then I'm like, well, I really don't know. Well, what's interesting? And so eventually I would figure out something by Sunday. But have you ever had those times where you really don't know what you're going to preach until basically Saturday night, and so you throw something together? Saturday night sermons are no good. They don't need to be happening. And not only that, something that can happen is that because you don't really have any type of plan, you end up preaching on the same type of things over and over and over again. And so it's because you're locked into a framework and you're not really expanding outside and planning those different lessons. So another thing that I hear a lot of times whenever I'm around people and preaching and people are asking me ideas and that kind of thing, they'll ask me, hey, how do you come up with so many topics to preach? Well, I'll tell you how you do that. You don't do that just by saying, well, what am I going to figure out to preach next Sunday? You do that by writing down your ideas. And we'll talk about this more in a whole nother video. But it's really important to kind of know the different topics that you're going to be talking about. And so we'll do a separate video at some point on basically writing down ideas and how to go about that and all of that. Regardless, this is a huge time killer for a lot of people. And so let's talk about 3 ways that you can plan your lessons. The first one is from Barry Kirchville. I don't know if you've heard of the book. It's called Preparing the Young Man to Preach. It is a really, really good book. I recommend it to any young preacher. But he talked about a very interesting process. And this may fit for maybe some of the people that don't like it more organized, which we'll talk about later. But what he talked about is, so on Thursday, whenever you're leaving the office, now he's got the assumption that you're off Friday and Saturday, and we'll talk about that in another lesson. Whenever you leave though, on Thursday, decide your topics for the next Sunday. So you've already written everything, you've got it all planned, and you're thinking, okay, in basically 9 or 10 days, whatever it is, I'm thinking this is what I want to talk about. And so the reason that's helpful is because when you get in on Monday and you're worn out or whatever from the sermons and stuff, you don't have to go through and do this creative basically hurdle at the beginning of the week. You go through and you say, all right, I decided I was going to talk about Jesus and the woman at the well. And then I was going to talk about the parable of the sower in the evening or whatever. And so then you go through and you start thinking, all right, how am I going to work this? How am I going to plan it? Now, again, this is really, really valuable because then instead of spending 2-3 days not really knowing what you're going to preach about and kind of looking around and looking at ideas, you already know. You're already ahead of the game. So the first way is to go through on Thursday whenever you're leaving the office, know what you're going to preach the following Sunday. All right, so the second one, this is from Shane Carrington. And so this is one of the things that I do. I go and I ask people about how they do their work and how they structure their week. And so I had a conversation with him at one point, and he did something that I've never heard before. And so what he does is he actually has multiple sermons being written at one time. So if Shane has an idea, he goes through and he has, some basic outline structure. He puts his title, puts his ideas, whatever, and so he'll go through and write all that down and puts it in a file folder. Well, every Monday when he comes to the office, he pulls out that entire list of sermons. Now, keep in mind, this could be somewhere between like 5 to 15 or more sermons. And what he does on Monday is he goes to every single one of those lessons and adds to it. And he just kind of works through those, and maybe he has some things to contribute, maybe he doesn't. Maybe some of those are really passionate about that week, and so he really starts writing things out and really starts adding. And so he goes through this whole process, and then he decides, okay, hey, what am I going to do Sunday? Well, again, there's none of this hurrying or none of this wondering what I'm going to preach. He goes through and he has a whole set list of those types of things. And most likely, he's been working on that sermon for that Sunday. He's been doing it for multiple weeks beforehand. And so he goes through, he picks out what's ready, and then that's what he does Sunday. And now, this may not work for you. I understand that. It works for him, and he does a good job with it. But it's just a matter of what you're comfortable with and trying to help kind of get rid of that hurrying and indecision that can cost us so much time. The third one that I've heard of is from Mark Roberts. If you've ever been to YPW, that's going to be, I think it's in February this year, and I've been to it multiple years. It's got a lot of great things. He talks a lot about his preaching calendar. And now I'm going to do a full video on that. I may even do it with Mark, but I'm going to do a full video on how you actually structure the preaching calendar. But I want to just kind of give you a brief overview. And so what Mark does is he collects topics, and then he actually plans out his lessons for the entire quarter. So that's going to be 13 lessons, for your Sunday morning or your first service on Sunday morning, and then 13 lessons for your second service. And so he'll go through and have basically 26 lessons that he's got laid out for his sermons. And so when it comes to Sunday, he says, okay, what am I preaching Sunday? And he's already decided beforehand, many months perhaps, of what he's going to preach. And he just says, okay, he goes to that lesson, he grabs that lesson, he says, this is what I'm preaching Sunday. And then he writes that sermon. Now, one of the tips with that is he goes through and collects his ideas and puts it in a folder, his hot topic folder. And he'll go through and take that hot topic folder and use that to fill up the various quarters. And then, knowing that he's going to preach on some of these lessons down the line, if he sees an article or some information about those topics, he'll actually put it in with that file on that sermon. And so when he comes to that week, he just grabs that information and says, okay, I'm ready to write my lesson. And so he knows the sermons that are coming, which is helpful because it may not be for you, but for me, my mind just kind of starts thinking about what am I going to be preaching coming up. And so then he's got that along with themes and series and all that kind of thing that he's already got all planned out. What it does, again, is provides a framework of how we go about our lessons. Because one of the things that Mark talked about in that is that when you look at what preachers do with preparing their lessons for a year, you're talking, let's say you do 2 sermons every week and you preach 50 weeks out of the year. That's going to be 100 different topics that you've got. And that's not including your Bible class or anything like that. And so when we look at that, these are things that are important, but they're definitely not urgent. They're not something that you have to do right at this minute. The only deadline you have is every week to week to week thing. And so this is really just giving a framework for how you go about and plan what you're going to talk about. And there's all kinds of benefits, and that's not really the nature of this video. But this is to help basically get rid of that indecision and that wasted time. So that if you're that young guy and you're wondering, hey, what am I supposed to be doing with my time? Or maybe you're that guy that's preaching and working full time, and you're using a lot of time trying to take care of your family in other ways. I'm telling you, this is the kind of stuff that makes a huge difference. And so, anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you have any other questions or anything, write those down in the comments. If you like this video, definitely like it. Share it with other people. And if you're new to the channel or something like that and you haven't already, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it.